Moving on now to our DMGS, Geopolitics of Energy, Newsbreaker Item 2, April 20th, 2018. President Trump declares in the following tweet, "Looks like OPEC is at it again. With record amounts of oil all over the place, including the fully loaded ships at sea, oil prices are artificially very high!" Exclamation mark. No good and will not be accepted. At a recent summit in St. Petersburg, OPEC members and Russia announced that they will increase production, and they will announce the level of increase at the upcoming June 22nd OPEC meeting. Since that announcement a few days ago, WTI prices have dropped by $6 a barrel, from $73 to $67 in a span of 3 days. With that context as the backdrop, let me pose the following question. Preston. We have just celebrated Memorial Day and honored our fallen heroes and military veterans, the most recent of whom are veterans of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. From your position as DMGS Professor of National Security, and given Iran's loss of revenue pending the application of sanctions under a new round that the President has announced he would apply, and combined with possibly much lower oil prices, what is your assessment for any further U.S. military involvement in that region as a result of instability in the manner that we are witnessing now in Venezuela?
That's a good question, Paul Michael. I think when you look at some of the actors in the region, and especially if you look at Iran now because of the Chikpoa decision, I think Iran is going to continue on its path where they take a more of an asymmetric approach, where it's political warfare, proxy warfare. They're probably going to use a huge diplomatic effort with the European countries to try and maintain some kind of financial cash flow. They'll also have a very large information warfare campaign. I think the United States is really looking at its options right now because it does not have to be the guarantor of security like it has in the past. So some of the new things we've seen recently was the president wanting more foreign military sales and support to Gulf countries. We're also taking more of an approach where it's train, advise, and assist, vice having large units on the ground as a presence in the region. So these are subtle shifts in the way that we're assisting partners and friends in the region. But I think there's also an expectation for some of those countries to step up and take on more of the burden of national security issues.
Very good. Adam, it may be reasonable to assume that oil will fall into the low 60s or even the 50s by the fall of this year. If so, what would that mean for Saudi military expenditures, and specifically its costly military campaign in Yemen?
Well, if history is any indication, it's not likely to have a huge impact on defense spending by Saudi Arabia or military expenditures. What will take the hit and what will, in these times, is usually public spending in other ways. And this may have an impact on more of the Vision 2030 type reforms than it will military expenditures and defense spending. As Colonel Laughlin just pointed out, with the with the Iran post-JCPOA focusing on asymmetric tactics and strategy in general, Yemen especially will be of concern for Saudi Arabia because of the attacks coming across the border. If Iran continues to support such groups with weapons transfers and others as part of their asymmetric strategy and support for proxies, this will drive, in my opinion, defense spending and military expenditures far more than the price of oil. Again, I think that we'd see, before we see any change in expenditures, military expenditures, you'll see changes in other areas of public spending that may be more beneficial in the long run, but sadly that's where we go. In a Vision 2030, a lot of the expenditures that would go towards that would probably take a hit.
A supplemental question. In terms of the purchase of arms that Saudis have committed to over the last year or two, how indeed would that be impacted by a downward trajectory of oil prices, wherein the budgetary calculations for Saudi Arabia would have to be slashed quite significantly over the next couple of years?
I can't say specifically, honestly. In my opinion, historically speaking, defense spending hasn't been something that has taken a hit when they've had downturns in oil. It's been spending in other areas. So historically speaking, those contracts and those types of expenditures would still largely probably stay largely intact. And I also, in my opinion as well, and if we look at indication from the past, it's going to be those considerations vis-a-vis Iran and other threats they face. They're going to push the defense spending as well as domestic issues that they have, but are going to drive those expenditures more so than the downward turn in oil. They will slash in other areas before they slash defense expenditures. Especially, as I said, Yemen is a problem again, and Yemen is a problem that they see, especially from an asymmetric standpoint of Iran's strategy of supporting proxies in the region. There'll still be quite focus there, but again, Yemen is also one that is not just about Iran. There are other things that are taking place there in terms of geopolitical competition, and also there's potential spillover coming from that conflict to Saudi Arabia when you have a population of 24 million people that could become refugees overnight. Or they could go from IDPs to refugees and pose a challenge to the kingdom.
Is Yemen still drawing revenue from oil exports?
Yes. Yemen is still drawing, yes. I can't tell you exactly where or exact amounts, but yes, they are still getting money from oil exports. So those terminals are running. The UAE actually controls, I know, the gas plant there and the ports there. So yes, there are still some, and Badea is another one that those are going to other groups. Smuggling is still an issue of oil and other things, but those are even being clamped down by the UAE and other forces on the ground.
Thank you. Rula. The Saudi Aramco IPO is predicated on high and sustained oil prices around $100 a barrel in order to secure the $1 trillion valuation the Saudis would hope to obtain for the IPO. What happens to the IPO and also to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030 for socioeconomic development if prices cannot sustain themselves above the $80 floor that makes the IPO and even the Vision 2030 viable?
Thank you for the question. As ambitious as the Aramco IPO and Saudi National Vision 2030 are, I think they will proceed with plans. The timing of the IPO might be delayed until market conditions and political conditions, for that matter, are met and the Saudis have the right investment environment to be able to list. And the Saudis have no reservation in delaying the IPO or waiting until that climate is right for the listing. In terms of Saudi National Vision, on the other hand, that will not be delayed. The vision is set, it's been communicated from a top-down approach, and there's a lot of buy-in from the population. The kingdom is instituting reforms already to realize the vision. They're attracting investments outside of the traditional oil-based economy investments that they have been reliant on. They're trying to move towards a knowledge-based economy. And some of those areas outside of oil that are attractive investment opportunities are in mining, education, technology, and tourism. That's just to name a few. And they're also attracting world-class companies. So the projection for foreign direct investment will actually probably increase based on Saudi Arabia's geostrategic location and the opportunities that that presents. So in short, I have no doubt that Saudi National Vision or the IPO will happen in due course. And Aramco will be one vehicle to be able to fund this. And I think that they can probably do that at lower than $80 a barrel. But they're also going to be attracting a lot of world-class companies to invest in new opportunities in the kingdom.
Supplemental question. Vision 2030 has quite often been associated with the personality and leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Would you say that is still the case, or has it been institutionalized, or is it in the process of being institutionalized and not dependent on one individual per se?
I think that it was his vision. He is seen as that pillar that's the driving force behind national vision, and the way that the kingdom is set up, it is a very top-down approach in terms of institutionalizing these priorities. But this is something that's now been adopted throughout the kingdom. And as I mentioned before, it's, you have the leadership's buy-in, but you also have the grassroots buy-in as well, which is very important for a population that's primarily under the age of 45 and going to be a driving force to be able to realize the vision.
Very good, thank you. Arnie. Reports indicate that both Russia, by 800,000 barrels a day, and Saudi Arabia, by 300 barrels a day, may announce these production increases at the next OPEC meeting on June 22nd. If this is the case, why would Russia commit to an almost 1 billion barrel per day increase and thereby accept significantly lower prices for an economy so dependent on oil and gas revenues?
It's true. This is hurting them economically, but they are still deriving revenues from this sale of energy, which is enough to fund their government and their military expeditions. I think Putin is banking on the willingness of the average Russian to tighten his or her belts and take the pain on the short term for the time being to demonstrate loyalty to the government and so on. So we've seen over the centuries how Russians have been extremely durable, hardy, and able to take tremendous hardship for the sake of national honor and national security. So I think Putin is aware of this. He's just won an election, which was no surprise, and his approval rating is in the 80% range, if you believe the Russian polls. So he has, I would say, a very strong mandate to do what he feels is right. Again, keeping in mind that when he took power in 2000, he had I guess you could call it an unwritten pact with the Russian people that essentially said, you give me power and I will give you national prestige and national honor, which was lost after the Cold War, and that the humiliation that the Russians suffered, they felt they suffered at that time. So in this case, he's been extremely successful. Again, it's all, I say, smoke and mirrors, but to the average Russian, he's been very successful and has kept his word. So I see this going on unless there's a breakdown in civil society, breakdown in the economy, in which he's challenged politically. I say that this would continue into the future.
Supplemental question, Arnie. As you indicate, the Russians historically tend to be underestimated in terms of their resilience. However, the same has been applied to their gas and oil sector. And yet we see that the Russians continue to be the leader in terms of overall production of crude. Do you think this will continue to be the case, where the Russians will be the leading producer of crude and relish their underdog position in the market?
Hard to say. I know they are hurting from the sanctions. They need the Western technology, particularly the ability to extract from these diminished wells and so on. Whether they'll continue at the current rate of production is hard to say. They probably will not. I think just by fact that a lot of these wells are diminishing, but they will be able to maintain a certain level of production that will be enough to keep them going. Just by the technology that they have or can acquire from other sources, I think that they will continue to be a player, maybe not to the level they are now, but going forward, and I think this again will drive enough revenues for them to continue their on a shoestring operation, just to continue operations as government operations as they see now.
Thank you. Tom, going back to President Trump's April 20th tweet declaration, the question I want to ask you is as follows. The President's operational strategy on the Iran nuclear deal may include an understanding with Saudi Arabia that upon the President's request, Saudi Arabia is obligated to increase production in response to the President's hard line against its arch-rival Iran. If the above statement is true, what does this tell us about the current nature of bilateral U.S.-Saudi relations and Trump's negotiating methods?
Thank you, Paul Michael, for the question. First off, I don't know if there's any secret agreement there, but I don't think it's actually there's necessarily has to be. I think to understand the way the president has approached this relationship, you can't separate his history and his background as a businessman, and most particularly a businessman who's focused on development projects, building things. In this case, it's a containment and maybe even a rollback strategy on Iran. He looks at that as the project. And when you go into a partnership, that has to be a mutually agreed upon end state, that both partners agree, they see the vision of what the project is. And I think he believes that both himself and Mohammed bin Salman have that same vision, a contained Iran and eventually a rollback on Iranian aggression. So that's that shared and understood goal. In order for that to happen, the health of both economies is important, and undergirding that is a desire for stability, most importantly, in the oil market. And defining stability, I think, is the negotiating terrain. What's stability? I think it's somewhere over 50, and probably with a ceiling of around 80, probably in the president's view. And what that allows is really the three pillars of a successful strategy undergirded by strong economies are, number one, a healthy U.S. and global economy. Number two, a price that allows the U.S. fracking industry to be profitable. Too low of a price is not good for the U.S. either, as a current leader in production. And I think great enhancements in U.S. Technology relevant to fracking has given more slack and flexibility in that area. And the third one is a price that allows Saudi Arabia to have a healthy economy and to continue to be a strong partner for the U.S. in this development project. Whether there's an agreement, formal agreement or not, I think they agree on the objectives and they agree on the ways and means of achieving those ends, and that's the stability in the oil market. And I think what you'll see is Saudi Arabia will respond to what might be side effects or secondary and third effects of U.S. pressure campaign on Iran, whether that's less Iranian oil on the market. I think the Saudis will fill the gap, and the U.S. will fill the gap. So I would say at the end of the day, keep in mind the president's approach on how he does business deals, and I think that's how he looks at this. This is a deal, and both parties agree on the end state, and they agree on the ways and means. And the negotiating area is where it's a good price for both entities at the end of the day.
Very good. And now we'll proceed to our Over the Horizon 2020 Rapid Fire segment with Geopolitics of Energy Forecasts, Projections, and Prognosis. Each panelist will have 60 to 90 seconds to respond to the questions that I will pose. First question goes to Adam. With numerous reports that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman may have been sidelined for one reason or another, does the Yemen war carry on into 2020?
Thank you for the question. I would say that although that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was the architect of the war in Yemen, he was one of the main players there. Yemen has become a situation that still will continue to be contained, and it's also again, as I said previously, it's a flashpoint of larger geopolitical issues or competition. And I don't think any sort of leadership change or anything will change much of that. Much like what's going on in Socotra and elsewhere, Saudi Arabia, if the UAE or Qatar or Oman or whoever is present in Yemen or Iran, they will want to counter that. So I don't think that will change their involvement. There may be a shift in strategy to focus more on local players and local actors. More of a buy with and through type strategy may be possible, which has its own challenges. But I do not think that it will, that at this point, looking to what's going on currently with the operations along the Red Sea and elsewhere, that just having Mohammed bin Salman or any other important actor sidelined will change Saudi Arabia's involvement into backing out of that conflict.
Thank you. Arnie, does the OPEC plus Russia coalition stick together, or does Russia go its own way and reclaim market share through increased production?
I don't think it does stay together very long. I see Russia and Saudi Arabia as natural competitors, certainly in the energy sector. So this is more of a marriage of convenience than anything. Russia seems to enjoy being an independent player. I think it's something that they relish, and being able to move in and out of these types of things as the situation requires or necessitates for their own interests. So again, over the long term, I would say it probably falls apart. I think, again, if I had to guess, by the end of this year, there may be other dynamics, whether the U.S. fracking is causing some type of a split between Russia and OPEC, then that would not surprise me.
Thank you. Rula, by 2020, will we see tangible, concrete progress on Saudi Vision 2030, and specifically in what sectors, what domains do you think we can anticipate concrete movement?
Absolutely. I think, they already have set a benchmark for the realization of Vision 2030, which is the Saudi National Transformation Program for 2020. And that's already underway. There's a lot of reforms, both from a private sector standpoint, but also from a fiscal one. You see a lot of investment in capacity building and trying to invest in some of the educational opportunities within the kingdom. And most importantly, social reforms for a society that's eager to, in large part, undergo this transformation.
And where do you see the social development aspect of this going by 2020?
I think, you'll see the kingdom open up to new businesses. The ownership rights within the kingdom are being reformed. There's an increase in tourism, and as I mentioned before, the strategy to move away from an oil-based economy to a knowledge-based one, and attract new investments into the kingdom in areas of mining, technology, and other such industries.
Thank you. Tom, President Trump has effectively given Iran and the European countries who are partners in the Iranian nuclear deal 3 to 6 months to rework that agreement. Will we see a new deal that the U.S. can live with, or a U.S. maximum pressure strategy extending out to 2020 on Iran?
So the short answer is no. Nothing's going to get done in 3 to 6 months, mainly because the other actors in this, Iran and the Europeans, don't believe it's in their interest to renegotiate the deal, and 3 to 6 months is not enough time to change that. I think we will see maximum U.S. pressure across the board, both from at the macro level, but also at the micro level with relative to businesses doing business with Iran. That being said, the president never stops negotiating. Again, we look at his approach as a business, is how he approaches in business, and the lesson I think from Korea is, we're off, we're on, we're back on. I mean, we're constantly negotiating. The interests don't change. The approach may change. So could there be a breakthrough, prior to 2020? Yeah, I think there could be. The president, I believe, is looking for a better deal all the time. So if that better deal presents itself, I don't think he's sticking to some ideological position. So so the short answer is no, not in 3 to 6 months. Maximum pressure, yes. Is it possible we could see a new deal before, in a 2-year horizon? I think it is possible. We'll wait and see.
Very good. Thank you. Preston, giving U.S. rising self-sufficiency in oil, particularly in self-sufficiency in energy, particularly oil and natural gas, will the U.S. develop a new security architecture in the Persian Gulf by 2020, or maintain the status quo?
No, that's a great question, and it's related to the answer I gave you earlier on shifting U.S. roles. I think you're going to see a subtle change where instead of being the lead nation in a lot of issues of security interest, we're probably going to be more in the supporting role to a supported host nation. I think the U.S. wants to disengage from Syria. I think the U.S. wants some kind of guarantee of stability in Iraq, even though the Sadr political movement has gained ascendancy back in Iraq. And I think that in Afghanistan, We want to guarantee that the United States will stay there to help build that nation. So the latest announcement of the next commander for NATO Resolute Support Mission is Major General Miller, who has a long history in that area. So I think you're going to see a subtle approach where the United States takes less of a lead effort. It'll be more of a supporting effort with more of an emphasis on host nations to take care of their own security affairs.
Thank you. And with that, we wrap up 2 segments on the geopolitics of energy with this wonderful panel of experts. We invite your comments and observations to the Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security here in Washington, D.C. I'm your moderator, Paul Michael Wiebe. Thank you.